pinch punch, it's the first of the month. So I'm a few days late with this week's video. Apologies for that. I will blame it on Brexit, the weather and bunnies. And not just plot bunnies either. I am actually looking after some real bunnies for my friend and they are a handful. I can totally understand why bunnies in contemporary children's films always turn out to be a bit evil. So those of you who've been watching my earlier videos will know that last month I have been working on Secrets and Lies, which is one of the ones in the thriller series that I'm going to go all the way through, and then in a few years I'm going to go back to the start, make it all work properly, and then release it as a sort of series every year or so. And I finally finished it. I finished Secrets and Lies. I've been working on that thing since last July, so I'm really pleased with that. It means when I start back into the thriller series in April, I can get straight on with Song of the Sharks and get into the research and plotting for that particular set. So that's really cool. I didn't get any prompts written this week, partly because of the snow and partly because I just didn't. Partly because other things just sort of happened and got in the way. Well, I did come up with a corker of a plot for Death by Delivery, so hopefully next week I'll be able to work on that a bit more. I went to Rhubarb at the Triangle on Wednesday, which is the local poetry club. It's always brilliant. There's an open mic. The first half is always an open mic, and then there's a headliner who comes in and does a reading of their work, and it's always fab because you get so many different voices from so many different places, and it was a full house this time, so which is a great way to start off the year. I've been working quite closely with Ray Bailey to get their first anthology together and ready for publishing. It's called Hey Kid. It's been a bit difficult for me in some ways because the poems deal with grief and the loss of a friend, and it was a mutual friend, so I find it very difficult to go through it without feeling quite a lot of the emotions connected with that. It is now published. You can get hold of it in all the usual places, on Amazon, Kindle, iBooks, Kobo, Nook, Barnes & Noble and Smashwords. It's dark and angry and occasionally funny, and I think there's some quite powerful stuff in here. I realise that I am biased. Hey Kid, Ray Bailey, check it out. So I put on Twitter that I didn't know quite what to do for the video, and also that I've been putting it off a bit, and Lewis Jordan suggested I did the video on procrastination. The trouble is, if I did do a video on procrastination, I'm not sure I'd ever get round to it. So I do what I always do, I go to the hive mind. And it was my good friend Bones this week who suggested I talk about world building, particularly in relation to the House of Vines. I know Mina and Emily and Hayley have also asked for me to do something on world building. So, you know, it seems like a good week to sort of approach that. So yeah, this one's for you. So my first response when Bones asked me how I approached world building in House of Vines, I just went, well, it's Stafford. And she went, but I've been to Stafford and there isn't a Cavern of Wizards. And I went, good point. So I started thinking about how I'd put the elements together from different places and things. A lot of my world building stems from situations, from dialogue, from the characters themselves. I find it very hard to sit down and build a world and then set stories in. So it's one of those things that sort of happens as I go along. So I usually start with a scene or a sequence of action that I have a really strong mental image for. It'll be a scene with a really narrow focus. I can just see what's happening right then with those people, and I will see them and the room they are in, or the place they're in if they're outside, what they're doing and what they're saying in vivid detail. And I'll start to move outwards from there. So in House of Vines, for me, the scene that sparked the whole novel was the storm sequence, where they've just got back, they've arrived in the main arcade, and they've all fallen down exhausted, and everyone's drenched. So this scene gave me several locations I could quite immediately see, if see is the right word. I can see it in my mind's eye now. I can see the main room of the arcade. I know there's 2 corridors branching off behind me. I'm facing the garden. Everyone's in a heap in the middle. The preparation table is to my left against the bookcase. The kitchen's over there. You've got the sofa against the wall, the desk and the the bookshelves and the rug where Astrid and Jake do their homework, that's over there. And across the other side of the garden I can see the 2 coach houses. So when I first envisaged the scene, I could see all of that. So I knew that there were subsidiary locations. I could also see that there were spiral staircases. So I thought, oh, well, we're above something. What are we above? And I thought shops. And then I thought, oh, I bet it's one of those old Victorian arcades. And so the arcade grew up around the scene. The reason the arcade became Martha is because I find it very difficult to write anything where magic doesn't at some point come in. And I thought, well, I might as well have some fun with this one and go big. And thus she did appear. It was enough to sort of... It gave me enough detail to sort of sketch out the building and get a sort of feel for what the history of the building is, what sort of thing goes on in it. So you know already that you are in a town, probably in the UK, but not necessarily, with one of those shopping arcades. So it's got enough history of commerce at the right time to have been big enough at the right time to have one of those. So already, just that one building has given me a sort of basic idea of where the place they're in might fit. You'll have to excuse me drinking, I've got a bit of a sore throat because of all the snow, so. What the scene also gave me was a group of characters who then presented a series of questions based on their characteristics, how they're responding to the situation, that kind of thing. And it's in answering these questions that your world starts to grow. So, for example, we'll start with the scene proper. So where were they before? So you've got this group of bedraggled people. There's a storm howling outside. Where were they before? They didn't use the stairs, so they must have used magic. So we know it's a world that magic exists in. They were quite definitely outside, given the state of them. Where were they? And then into my head pops this image of a rooftop with a sort of bedraggled tent in the lee of one of the air conditioning units. And I was like, oh, okay, so they were on a rooftop. That looks kind of like the rooftops that you get on the blocks of flats. So now we've got a block of flats. We've got a town is the right size to contain both blocks of flats and a shopping arcade, but you also know that there's magic. So you've got 3 aspects there. Why were they on the roof? To go and get the kids. How did they know about the kids? Well, because someone told them. Who told them? Reggie. And then we have, who's Reggie? So you get another character. You know that he's got to have met either Christopher or Ivy before. He's got to trust them enough to tell them about the kids on the roof. So you've already got a bunch of relationships between these people, but you've also got a sort of idea of their economic backgrounds and their relationship with the world around them. So with Christopher, you'll get a whole set of things. He's a bit of a nomad, so you don't get a whole lot about the town, but you do get a bit about the society, the structure of the society of the world of practitioners, because he feels he has to be on the run. He's quite bookish, so you know there's got to be places in the area that will have attracted him, so the bookshop sort of starts cooking off in its own corner until you need it. A bit later on in the process, when I was looking at the Barrowcloughs and their place in the sort of society, in the space that is Brindleford, and I started the house, the Crooked House, which is one of my favourite places in the whole thing. But also, when I was thinking of it, I was thinking, I've got these 2 elderly wizards who you know, they've lived in the area most of their lives. They've grown up here. There's a strong magical element in this community. What kind of house would they have? Which gave me another aspect of the town, because there are places with older houses, with bigger houses. I also needed somewhere for Quentin Post to live, and again, that came out as the older, richer, maybe witchier part of the town. There is an established core of magic there. And you have the court as well, which most of the practitioners of the town at the start of the story are not aware of unless they've had direct dealings with them, because Brindleford is in some ways the court at Brindleford is a bit of it's a sort of a relic from an earlier time. That knowledge gives you an extra bit to build on about the world outside of Brindleford. So it's sort of layers. For me, world building is building layers based on questions. The other thing that is vital, I think, to World building is research. The 4 books behind me, underneath House of Vines, were 4 of the main ones I used when I was looking at building the world of Brindleford and the area around it, although there were stacks and stacks of other ones. Things like the triquetra, the arrangement between the local magical leader, the local law person, and the local religious leader, that sort of came out of reading a series of essays on how medieval village life was structured, and then thinking, well, how would that be affected if magic was an accepted part of daily life, you know. Read about the history of the town, read about the fairy tales of the area that you're sort of setting it in, the folk tales, the history, crimes that have happened there over the years, things that are still there, big houses, warehouses. Has there been an economic downturn that's made some things means that there are old industrial buildings standing empty? Are they really standing empty? In your world, are they being used but no one notices? That kind of thing. I know a couple of people who are a bit more hardcore than me, who are making up entire languages in the way Tolkien did. Haley Drescher, for example. Their current project is sort of part in their real world, the contemporary world, and part somewhere else. And they're working on a language, they're working on a magical system, they're working on the history of the place, the lore of the place, of both sides of the place, and how those two things interact. That's something I haven't approached myself yet, but I find it fascinating to watch from the outside, because you get snippets when you know when you're talking to other writers and you're sort of saying, oh, well, this is what I'm working on today, and I think it's going to be really rewarding once she's done all this work, because you'll have a complete world that you can then put these details into. I think one of the stories that always stay with me are the ones where the world is quite rich in detail. So particularly for things like the Discworld, Harry Potter, Gormenghast to an extent, although I wouldn't want to live there. You know, those sort of things, they're ones where your mind can go there because you can see the picture in the writer's head, or close to the picture in the writer's head. And a lot of that comes from the world they've built or the world they've researched, and how they've combined those two together. So that's sort of the beginnings of how I approach world building, particularly in the context of House of Vines. So next week I will be starting, well, in fact today even, I will be starting back on the next project in my cycle, which is The Last Human Getaway, which is my Scottish mythology thing. So you can probably expect some weird historic facts, some myths and legends, and probably quite a lot of complaining about the map that I drew that's probably wrong when I was world building for that one in the coming weeks. I'm hoping to get halfway through that by the end of February, but I don't know if that's going to happen. So I'll probably be content if I get another third, if I'm a third through. Half would be nice though. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If there's anything that you want me to cover in future, please drop a comment below. I'd love to hear the kind of things that you want to talk about. I'd love to hear how you approach world building in your own stories and stuff, and I'd love to see your maps. I love maps. Send me maps. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, check out the other ones. If you want to see more content like this, please hit subscribe. If you feel like throwing some pennies my way, I do have a Patreon page, details below.